The impact of the COVID-19 virus on the labor market has been massive. In fact, some 305 million people around the world have lost their jobs in the first quarter of 2020. But what happens to those who were already struggling to find work prior to the outbreak? I'm talking, of course, about the young people. Youth unemployment has always been a major issue around the world, and the situation has become a whole lot worse with the current global financial crisis.
So it's like you go to school, and then once you are qualified, you sit with a whole stack of certificates that you can't actually use. But then you can see within the public sector that, yeah, I can make a contribution. Yeah, I can make a contribution. But it's like they are just not hiring the correct candidates.
But is education the key to success here? Well, it can be argued that, well, it should be, but sometimes even having the qualifications can mean tough times ahead, which can have a negative effect on future generations who are seeking a good education to find a good job.
I am discouraged a whole lot because there are times when I feel like, how do I even encourage my children to go to school when they can see me struggling with all these qualifications? Because it's like, but you've got so much, but you're still working a job that is actually for any other lay person. Like, you don't need to be so qualified to have that position. So how do you tell them that education is the key? Is the key to what?
Hello and welcome to Economic Divide with me, Kavit Hawaii. This week's edition of the show, we will be looking at the youth unemployment crisis and assess just how hard it is for young people to find jobs, as well as what impact it can have on their lives. Now, don't forget, this is your show, so we want to hear from you. Are you a recent graduate looking for a job but can't find one? How many jobs have you applied for to no avail? Check out our Twitter page using the marker @ED_program and let us know your experiences. We would love to hear from you and share your stories. One might think that youth unemployment is a problem that only developing countries face. However, this is not the case, as figures released by the UNs International Labour Organization predicts that some 1.6 billion informal economy workers are suffering from the COVID-19's hit on the economy and workforce. And many of these are young people from developed countries. So just how bad an impact has the COVID-19 virus had on younger workers? Well, figures show that 1 in 6 youth are now out of work as a direct result of the pandemic, with women being the hardest hit, with a combined figure of 13.6% of youth unemployment, higher than any category of unemployed people. Now, if we were to take a look at this problem in a regional perspective, proving that the situation is not just limited to developing nations, the Americas, for example, sees youth unemployment average around 13.1%, with Europe hitting 12.9% and Central Asia hitting around 14.6%, proving that the situation is a global crisis that needs to be addressed.
Whereas much like many social issues in the world, it's highly anticipated that developing nations struggle more than developed nations when it comes to everyday aspects of life, be this education, hunger, or in this case, employment. But the truth of the matter is, many of the social traits we all identify to are linked with education and employment being a classic. Across various universities in the world, in particular within developed nations, the notion of going to university and obtaining a degree is now more common than ever, with many young people leaving college with a degree in their hands, but suddenly realizing that there are tens of thousands of pounds, euros and dollars in debt, and with no job to walk into upon graduation. The reasons for many being unable to find jobs are plentiful, but include things like an oversaturation of graduates applying for elite jobs, or maybe a recession or economic crisis that means that there's just no jobs to fill. When this happens, the entire job structure chain is thrown into an imbalance as graduates seek any form of income to repay their debts and get a foot on the career ladder.
So what happens in sort of by educational groups in a downturn like we're experiencing now is that what you tend to see is that the very well educated, the graduates, particularly new graduates who are entering the labour market, sort of downgrade the kind of jobs that they're going for. So they aren't just going, in a sense, for the high-end, professional, highly paid type occupations, but start moving down, if you like, the ladder of the occupation hierarchy. and displace people who would normally be moving into that segments of the labour market.
However, with so many university leavers wanting to find big-end jobs, the fact that they have a job at all is a bonus, albeit on a lower pay scale than they would have earned should the conditions be right for a top-end job. With graduates and young people so low down the security ladder in companies, they are often the first to suffer the consequences of a failing employment system in two ways, either through not being able to find a job in the first place, or being laid off from a company as experience and skills take precedence in times of hardship, with once again the fresh graduates finding themselves on the end of the firing line. It seems then for those leaving colleges and universities around the world, they appear to be stuck in a catch-22 situation. Firstly, many jobs require a degree or higher college education to land the job, but at the same time, many want their staff to come with experience in the field, something that for a young graduate is an almost impossible task to achieve, hence leaving the youth in a difficult position in many developed countries, and hence is why we see such a high number of unemployed graduates.
When it comes to youth unemployment, one of the worst hit areas is Europe, with figures eclipsing the global average in some of the biggest European economies, starting with the euro area, for example, which has an average of 15.8% of youth unemployment for the under 25s. On the Iberian Peninsula, Spain is one of the hardest hit nations with, well, their average coming in at 33.2% of the young people who are out of work. The UK also matches the Spanish figures with 33% of the young people either not in full-time education or out of work. On mainland Europe, France also sees some, well, 21.8% of the youth who are out of work there, joined by Italy with 20.3%. The worst figures have hit Southern Europe, with Greece coming in at 35.6% of youths failing to secure any form of employment or income. But this is not just a COVID-19 phenomenon. Sweden, which did not impose any lockdown restrictions in its country, also shows signs of severe youth unemployment. Their figures coming in at 24.4% of the youth there not claiming to be in any form of employment, showing that the issue is much wider and deeper than first thought.
As we've previously seen, the oversaturated job market means that many people looking for jobs are unable to land them due to the high demand and even higher competition between people when it comes to being hired in the top positions for companies. So what happens to young people looking for work when a major financial crisis hits? The COVID-19 virus was more than just a virus that spread across the world, bringing illness and death. It brought with it one of the most life-changing events in human history. One of the most affected age groups as a result of the pandemic are the youth. Why? Simply because of the nature of their jobs. Again, most notably in developed nations, with many young people working in the service and leisure industry, both of which have been thumped hard by the virus. But the effect of the virus has caused a ripple effect on the job market, as in order for many of the so-called entry-level jobs to survive, for example in retail, leisure and services, people have to spend money. Yet when they stop spending, so the demand for staff reduces, and hence jobs are lost, and the younger generations are caught in a trap.
When people start losing jobs, other people get scared and they stop spending. And that creates a sort of a vicious circle as people cut back, they're not spending, that means more job losses and the economy starts going into a negative spiral.
So what's causing this drop of spending in nations where many governments have stepped in to help their employees with money? Jobs in theory should be safe as people still have money to spend, but ulterior factors also appear to be playing their part in stopping people spending.
So the response of government is to try and keep the economy moving, but to try and counter the key problem that's the nature of the recession, and not all recessions are the same. In this recession, the big problem is that people are not spending, and they're not spending because of social distancing, they're staying at home, etc., which means they're saving money. But something like cutting VAT to reduce prices is unlikely to be to counteract that.
For the young people today affected by the impact of the virus, the road to recovery may be a long and difficult one, and one can only wait and see as to how and when the economy recovers before the youth find their feet again on a very rickety job ladder.
Joining me in the studio is Lara Jane Rawlings, the CEO of Youth Employment UK. an independent social enterprise founded in the year 2012 designed to tackle youth unemployment. The organization has a range of experts on hand to provide advice, support, and insight to youths across all areas, and works hard to ensure that youth employment remains a government priority in the UK. Laura Jane, many thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, first up, if you can tell us about why younger people are struggling to find work on the job market currently, and particularly in the developed nations. Is this due to the impact of the COVID-19, do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. Young people as a group, certainly here in the UK, have been 3 times more likely to be unemployed than older groups since the last recession that we had following sort of the financial crisis of 2008. So young people are more susceptible in the labour market. They are at greater risk of being in low paid, low skilled work, insecure work too. And so what we're seeing now, we in the UK still have quite a large youth unemployment problem, with nearly 750,000 young people not in education, employment or training here in the UK before the COVID pandemic took hold. And now as we're seeing the economic challenges that the coronavirus has brought to the UK, we will see that youth unemployment number rise. We're estimating between 1.5 to 2 million young people being affected.
So you have about 800,000 before COVID-19, and then now you say maybe 2.5 to 3 million are being affected. Is the government taking this seriously?
Yeah, the UK government has absolutely, is working at 1,000,000 miles an hour, as I'm sure many other governments are, to look at how they bring the economy back online, how we get Britain working again, and certainly they're very aware of the challenges that young people in particular are going to face, because hospitality, leisure and tourism, they are industries that will take much longer to come back online, and young people are 2.5 times more likely to be working in those industries. So it just has this huge knock-on effect. So the government are working at a rapid pace, and Youth Employment UK and our partner organisations have been working very closely actually with the UK government. That really reached out to find out, learn from evidence, learn from what works, learn from the experts, talk to young people is something that we're encouraging them to do, to make sure that the policies and the investment they're about to commit to are going to have the greatest amount of impact that they can do.
Okay, finally, is there a gap between social classes when it comes to youth unemployment? Naturally, some people are more privileged than others. So is this also a class problem?
Yes, it is. We led a report 2 years ago now on the role of the family in social mobility. And what you can see in that report is, of course, where a family, where parents are able to transfer social, economic and cultural capital back to their children, those children are more likely to flourish than those children without that parent support and without that families without that capital. The ability to find a good job really will come down to the types of work experience you've been able to benefit from, and we know from young people that the type of work experience available to them is largely on who their parents are connected to, and so when they move on into employment, there's a lot of privilege that happens there, where parents like myself, my children will be great, will receive great support in moving on into the world of work because of my connections and my professional connections. That's not the same for all young people, and it shouldn't be that. It shouldn't be about luck on how well you can move from education into employment. It shouldn't be down to sheer luck and fortune. Okay,
we're going to have to unfortunately end it there. Thank you so much, Laura Jane Rawlings, the CEO of Youth Unemployment UK.
Thank you.
Okay, a link to this site that's going to appear on your screen is how you can find out more about this organization, or if you would like to contact them for any help and advice that you may need. The address, www.youthunemployment.org.uk. Okay, we are going to take a quick break here on Economic Divide. Don't go anywhere, as there's plenty more left to cover. We're going to take a look at how skills and training play a part in those seeking to gain careers without going to the university, as well as looking at the economical and political impact of youth unemployment around the world. And then we're going to be joined by researcher and writer Atafe Padidar to have her take on the youth unemployment crisis. So stay right where you are. We'll be right back after this short message. Time to look at what else is happening in the world of business and economy, starting with Bloomberg. Now, it has reported that in spite of the impact of coronavirus on the Chinese economy, the country is set to report a small growth at the end of the year, compared to a shrink in the economy of its nearest rival, the U.S., which is due to see a 6% reduction in its GDP. South Korea, China, and Japan have agreed to accelerate their trilateral ties and boost efforts to create a mega Asia-Pacific trade deal. During the meeting, Seoul, Beijing, and Tokyo agreed to conclude a comprehensive, high-level FTA next year to promote deeper economic ties. A trade and economic war could erupt in Africa as Ethiopia and Egypt fail to resolve a dispute over a hydroelectric dam located on the River Nile. The dispute could be a world's first in the battle of blue gold, namely the precious resource of water. And finally, this entry was worth highlighting, which may become a future program, and it has to deal with the industrial food system in North Africa. One of the things that stood out in this entry, amongst many, was that 75% of the global agricultural land is currently exploited by agribusiness companies, while the current industrial food system only produces about 30% of the world's food.
Life's already tough for the millions of graduates around the world who are seeking jobs. For many in developed nations, it means having to take lower-end jobs. But for many in developing nations, it means a huge brain drain, as many seek opportunities elsewhere, also mostly to no avail. But what about those that have not attended schools and colleges and have left at a minimum age with no qualifications and are essentially looking to find a route into an entry-level career?
What you see for the less well-educated is that you get the big displacements of people from the labour market, such that, young people without a degree, we would be expecting really high levels of worklessness in the next year or so. 30, 40, 50% worklessness amongst those without university level qualifications.
Much like those who are entering the market from the graduate pool, the same issue of experiences and references can be a major issue for those seeking a job lower down the ladder. Yet the experience is similar for both, it seems.
Young people who leave school with little qualifications have nothing to counteract that. If you're well educated, that lack of experience is sort of counterbalanced by the fact that you have qualifications, often qualifications in specific areas which the firm is looking to recruit into. If we're looking into the general, less well educated, what are called entry jobs, where there aren't big skill requirements, big knowledge needed to start those jobs, young people in a sense have a double disadvantage. They don't have the qualifications to buttress the disadvantage of having no experience.
But as mentioned, with the added pressure of not having any experience, nor having a degree under their belt, things are even tougher for the lower educated people looking for work. Furthermore, the type of work that many young people could have seen themselves gaining, in apprenticeships for example, have also become a dying breed. With automated roles now being given to machines and robots in factories, manual labour is hence slowly becoming less in demand, meaning that those wanting to pursue such careers are slowly seeing those opportunities fade away as well.
Welcome back to Economic Divide with me, Kaveh. Joining me in the studio now is Atif Padidar, a researcher and writer. Well, Atif, thanks for joining us. Looking at this topic, it's not common knowledge that youth unemployment is such a crisis worldwide.
You got that right. About 40 million young people around the world join a labor market every year. It might seem a lot, but the job market is not growing enough because around 70 million out of the 200 million people out of work are young. So it means that if world economies don't find a solution, there's going to be a lost generation, bringing with it a loss of human capital, social exclusion, and dislocation. The other challenge is the quality of the jobs available. Unlike in previous generation, which made important gains in terms of workers' rights and conditions, what we are seeing right now is that the youth unemployment crisis has accelerated the replacement of the quality jobs with those that are not. Social protection policies have also been weakened, and there has been a fracture of the social contract. That's why we've been witnessing so many protest rallies about work and life conditions in the past decade. There were a lot of outcries from young people in both developing and developed nations. First, it all started in the Arab world, and then there was all those yellow vest protests in Europe, starting from France. And many countries in Latin America have been the scene of rallies by young people as well. So, if nothing is done to tackle global youth unemployment, the consequences will be significant. Economic, social, and employment policies need to be geared towards resolving this problem. Back to you, Kaveh.
Very well. Thank you so much for all that great information there. Ataf Ipadar, they're our researcher and writer. Now, let's take a look at the political and economical impact of youth unemployment around the world in this next report.
Finding a job is stressful at the best of times, but in challenging conditions, it's even worse. For many applying for jobs on a continual basis, the constant rejection that comes from unsuccessful applications brings with it a very serious consequence.
It's demoralising to be unemployed, and long-term unemployment is especially demoralising. And what we see is that once people have been out of work for about 3 months, or additional months out of work start to both, hurt people now, but they hurt people down the line into the future. And so you get this what's called scarring, where it's not just now, it damages people into the future. And there's legacies in terms of health, particularly mental health, associated with that as well. So we see that these individuals who are exposed to long-term worklessness go on to have very damaged lives, both economically and in health terms.
The psychological trauma of not being able to get into work can be difficult for some to overcome, with mental health cases in young people on the rise, not only through the lack of work, but due to the lifestyle that comes with not being in a routine and solid career. Demographics also play a part in the way and kind of job that people get. Much like getting into good universities, social class also plays a role in the best jobs, particularly for young people. For those who are most successful, the chances of having well-connected parents are part and parcel of the 19th hole mentality that sees connected people use those connections to benefit their children. The poorest areas of the nation generally have the fewest opportunities, meaning that escaping the glass ceiling is a very hard job.
Those disadvantaged groups are the less well educated, which we've touched on. Those tend to be living in more deprived areas, particularly in cities, but the deprived communities within cities. Disabled, those from ethnic minorities, young black unemployment across Europe and North America is typically sort of 3 times the national average.
The burden on the government hence becomes one of helping young people find a way into employment, training or education, which for many is an expensive and often lower-end priority, particularly in the West, where other governmental priorities often take precedent. With pressure and tension building up in the younger generations, the tendency to turn to protest, crime, delinquency and other non-sociable activities all mean that the ever-growing circle of frustration builds up, once again adding to the scarring of those who are unable to find jobs, build careers, and finally put to use their training, education, and desire to work in order to start their very own foothold on the career ladder.
Globally, 621 million young people aged 15 to 24 are not in education, employment, or training, with a further 75 million young people trained but without jobs. Now, in the next decade, 1 billion young people will enter the labor market, and with around 90% of the young people living in developing nations, the prospects look bleak for many, with figures suggesting that around 23% of youths around the world will earn less than $1.25 per day. In an already competitive market, so many factors make matters worse for young people, with sex, demographics, and poverty all adding to the problem. In spite of the best efforts of governments and charities around the world, a lot is still to be done to resolve the problem, meaning, until then, the gap will only widen further. Don't forget, you can watch this show and all of our previous episodes again by logging on to our website. You can also check out our Twitter page @ED_program, where you can get in touch with us, send us your stories, or simply follow the latest news. That's about all the time we have for this edition of Economic Divide. I've been Kaveh on behalf of myself and the whole team here. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.